My name is Lila Morgan, and this is the story of the night everything changed. I grew up in a square, brick house on Birch Street in Denver, Colorado, a place where winters smelled of pine smoke and summers were filled with the sound of cicadas. The porch was narrow and creaked when you stepped on it. The door was painted a soft blue that peeled around the edges, and the living room always smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. My father, Victor Morgan, bought that house before I was born. He said it was a temporary place until the company grows, but we never left. Even as his business climbed to the heights of American success, that small Denver house remained our beginning, and for me, the only place that ever truly felt like home. Father was an empire builder. He created Morgan Axis, a technology company that started in a single rented office with 2 engineers and a dream. He used to say he built his fortune on the back of data and destiny. By the time I was 27, Morgan Axis was valued at $50 billion, with contracts spread across Europe and America. My father's face was in business magazines, his speeches quoted by CEOs, and his words treated like gospel. But to me, he was still the same man who had once taught me how to fix the kitchen light, patient 1 minute, volcanic the next. When he married Elaine, my stepmother, I was 19. She was elegant in the way that makes you aware of your own plainness, soft voice, diamond bracelets, and eyes that calculated everything. Her daughter, Clarissa, was a mirror of her mother's grace. Clarissa was perfect, at least to everyone but me. She was 5 years younger, and from the day we met, she made sure I knew my place. I built systems. She built charm. My father adored her. That brings me to the night of the celebration, the night my life split in two. The party was held in Chicago, in a glass tower that glowed like a crystal under the city lights. The entire top floor had been transformed into a ballroom. White lilies filled every corner, a jazz trio played softly, and guests mingled in gowns and tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars. The room was filled with power bankers from New York, investors from London, engineers from Silicon Valley, and journalists eager to capture every word. It was supposed to be a celebration of success, but I felt like I was walking into a storm. I remember standing near the edge of the marble floor, holding a glass of sparkling water, while Clarissa floated across the room in a silver gown that shimmered under the lights. She looked like the heroine of a movie, laughing as cameras followed her. My father was in his element, shaking hands and telling stories about family vision and legacy. I waited for him to acknowledge me, to introduce me as the architect behind the company's core systems, but he didn't. He never did. Then came the moment. The lights dimmed slightly, and everyone turned toward the stage where Father stood holding a crystal wine bottle in his hand. The crowd grew quiet, expectant. He smiled that public smile of his, wide, confident, flawless. He thanked the board, the investors, and the team. Then his tone shifted, playful at first, then sharp. And, of course, he said, we must mention the people who didn't quite rise to the occasion. My daughter, Lila, is the biggest loser in our company, the one I'm officially kicking out tonight. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Then the laughter came, soft chuckles that grew into waves. Some people tried to hide it behind their hands, others just stared, unsure if it was a joke. My father lifted the bottle above his head like a trophy, pointing at me with it. The spotlight found my face, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. Clarissa smirked from across the room. I managed a smile, tight, practiced, so no one could see the crack forming inside me. My heart pounded, but I stood still. If I moved, I'd break. He called me too emotional, too idealistic, said I was not built for the real world. Then, still laughing, he waved me off the stage. It was his final act of humiliation. I left the ballroom quietly. The city outside was cold and glittering. From the balcony, I could see the river winding below like a dark ribbon. I heard the muffled music behind me, the clink of glasses, the polite applause that followed every cruel joke he made. That was the moment I realized the man who once taught me to dream had become the one who wanted me to disappear. As I turned to go, our company lawyer, James Thatcher, appeared beside me in a black suit, his tie too tight, his face pinched with discomfort. He handed me an envelope. "Your father asked me to get your signature," he said quietly. "Just a formality, to smooth the transition." Inside was a contract that would strip me of all stock options and erase my name from the founding documents. I read it twice. My chest burned, but my voice stayed calm. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said. I didn't sign. That night, I checked into a small boutique hotel on the edge of the city. The walls were painted navy blue, and the window looked out over the skyline, a maze of light and ambition. I sat on the bed and thought about the years I'd given to Morgan Axis. The nights spent writing code, the mornings spent fixing systems no one else could understand, the long hours of silence after every argument with father. I'd built the company's nervous system. Without my architecture, none of it would have run. And yet, he'd made me invisible. I ordered black coffee from room service, poured it into the sink, and opened my laptop instead. The screen lit up, casting white light across the dark room. I looked at the old test folder I had buried deep in the company's cloud server, a failsafe I had designed years ago, a silent guardian I never intended to use. It wasn't a weapon, not really. It was a virus, a small string of code that could lock the system if it ever fell into the wrong hands. Back then, I thought I was protecting the company. Now, I wasn't sure who I was protecting anymore. Outside, Chicago hummed. Cars moved like beads of light along the river. Somewhere in that same city, my father was toasting to my failure, and Clarissa was practicing her smile for the morning news. I should have cried. I didn't. I had gone past the point of tears. Instead, I started typing, slow, deliberate, precise. By the time the clock hit midnight, I had finished preparing the sequence. I didn't run it. Not yet. I only saved it. I watched the city until dawn, my reflection faint in the window, and I whispered to myself, "He wanted to erase me. Let's see how he does without me." That was the night the world saw the polished version of the Morgan family, powerful, untouchable. But in that small hotel room, I began writing the code that would tear it all apart. And so began the story of how I stopped being my father's daughter and became my own reckoning. When I left the hotel the next morning, the air in Chicago had a strange stillness. The streets were slick with rain, and the city lights flickered against puddles like shards of broken mirrors. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent the night staring at the lines of code on my laptop, each one a whisper from my past. I didn't know if I was about to destroy my father's company or simply take back what I had built. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't go back. Not after what he had done. Morgan Axis was more than an IT empire. It was the nervous system of half the country. Hospitals, freight carriers, energy firms, all ran on the software we built. My software, the first version, had been written in the Denver house I grew up in, at a desk wedged between the window and a bookcase. I had designed the architecture with one rule in mind: no one should ever be able to take total control of it. Maybe that was naive. My father believed control was everything. So he took mine. When he pushed me out, he also took my name off the patents, the core contracts, and the security frameworks I'd invented. He called it corporate necessity. But I had buried something inside that system, a secret no one but me knew existed. I called it the switch. It wasn't a virus, not exactly. It was a recursive loop, designed to jam non-critical processes and lock internal access until a manual override key, my key, was used. I'd written it after a hostile acquisition threat from a European competitor 3 years earlier. It was meant to protect us. Now, it would protect me. That morning, I walked to a cafe near Lake Michigan, the kind of quiet place that only locals knew about. The walls were painted green, and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. A woman named Ruth brought me coffee in a chipped mug. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a voice that sounded like someone who had seen too much, but still chose kindness anyway. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said as she set the cup down. "I'm fine," I lied. "You sure?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "You look like someone who just lost or won something big." "Maybe both," I said, and smiled faintly. Ruth nodded, as if she understood more than she should. "Sometimes they're the same thing," she said, and left me alone. I opened my laptop. The login screen of Morgan Access's internal admin portal blinked at me. I typed in my credentials, ones I'd quietly kept active under an unlisted developer tag, and accessed the deployment pipeline. My hands didn't shake. My mind was calm, almost serene, as though I'd already accepted what I was about to do. The switch sat hidden inside an old test branch labeled archival_research_v4, buried beneath layers of obsolete folders. I hadn't touched it in years. I ran a checksum, verified its integrity, then pushed a tiny update, a trigger. The command was short, only 16 characters long. When I hit enter, the system responded instantly. Deployment initiated. Estimated propagation, 6 hours. That was it. 6 hours until the heartbeat of Morgan Access skipped. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The lake shimmered under a thin fog, and somewhere in the distance, a gull cried. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, and yet more alive than I'd been in months. I had built this empire brick by brick, line by line. If it crumbled, it would do so by my hand. I stayed in the cafe for another hour, pretending to work. At one point, a man in a gray coat sat 2 tables away and opened a business magazine. My father's face was on the cover, beneath a headline that read, "Victor Morgan, the Titan who never fails." The sight of it twisted something in my stomach. He had failed me long before I ever wrote that switch. By noon, the rain had stopped. I decided to walk. The air smelled of wet pavement and gasoline. I wandered along the Riverwalk, where tourists took photos and street performers played violins for spare change. A musician with a weathered face played a slow tune that echoed through the arches. I dropped a $5 bill into his open case. He looked up and said, "You look like someone who's letting go." I didn't answer, but he was right. I passed a couple holding hands, laughing as though the world could never touch them. I envied their innocence. Somewhere in the glittering maze of skyscrapers behind me, my stepsister Clarissa was probably posing for an interview, basking in her new title as the heir apparent to Morgan Access. She had no idea the crown she'd stolen was already melting. As dusk settled, I returned to my hotel. I watched the clock on the wall tick toward the 6-hour mark. My laptop pinged once, a faint notification tone, and my heart skipped. The log monitor showed system lag spreading like ripples through water. I knew what that meant. The switch had activated. Warning, process timeout detected. Non-critical services paused. Data queue overflow in sector node 14. The message repeated across the network. I could almost imagine the panic rising inside the Morgan Access control center, the engineers scrambling, the executives shouting for explanations. I had always told them the system could run forever. Now it was showing them how wrong they were. Around 8 o'clock, I received the first call. The screen flashed with Evan Brooks, our head of operations. I didn't pick up. Then came another, Nora Pierce, PR director. Then another, my father. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate on the table until it fell silent. For a moment, guilt pricked at me. The employees didn't deserve this. But I reminded myself that they were just pawns in a machine built on arrogance, my father's arrogance. He'd fired good people for less. I hadn't destroyed lives. I'd just exposed the fragility of his empire. Outside, the city glowed in gold and red. I stepped onto the balcony, the wind sharp against my face. Chicago stretched beneath me, restless, beautiful, unforgiving. I thought about the Denver house, the creaking porch, the scent of coffee. That was the last time life had been simple, before ambition had turned my father into a stranger and me into his ghost. I whispered to the night, "You wanted to erase me, Father. Now you'll remember my name." Inside, my phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the storm gather over the skyline. The servers would crash by morning. The company would bleed money. Investors would scream. But I felt only a strange peace. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't trying to be the good daughter or the perfect engineer. I was simply being honest with him with myself, with the world. The switch wasn't vengeance. It was true. And by the time dawn broke over the city, every screen in Morgan Access would reflect it. When I woke up that morning, the world was already burning. My phone buzzed against the nightstand like it had a heartbeat of its own, vibrating, stopping, then starting again. I squinted at the screen. The first missed call was from Evan Brooks, our head of operations. The second is from Nora Pierce, our PR director. The third from Father. Then more followed. The board, the investors, even a few journalists. My notification bar looked like a storm front. I didn't answer any of them. I sat on the edge of the bed, the city still gray outside, and scrolled through the alerts. Internal systems are down. Server latency beyond threshold. Payment gateway stalled. Customer access restricted. It was a slow-motion implosion, every alert a small explosion under my ribs. My code had worked perfectly. The switch I had released had done what it was designed to do. Halt everything that wasn't essential. At first, I felt nothing. Just an odd, empty calm. Then, slowly, a chill crawled up my arms. I knew how fast things could unravel. I'd seen small glitches take down regional systems before, but this was global. Morgan Access, my father's billion-dollar machine, had stopped breathing. By 8 a.m., the news had caught wind of it. I turned on the TV just in time to see the headline flash across the screen. Breaking news. Morgan Access systems freeze. Global operations affected. Behind the anchor's bright smile, the chaos was visible in the crawl. Hospitals reporting outages, freight lines backed up, financial networks slowed to a crawl. The same company that had bragged about flawless uptime couldn't even log into its own servers. I made coffee, black and bitter, and watched the story unfold like a documentary I had already seen. The footage shifted from our shiny Chicago headquarters to angry clients outside. One man in Boston shouted that his company was losing $3 million an hour. A logistics firm in Portland claimed it had shipments worth $50 million trapped in limbo. A European investor group offered a rescue plan worth £400 million, but they demanded that half the staff be cut and the leadership, including my father, be replaced. The screen cut to a clip from last month's celebration. My father stood on that same ballroom stage, champagne glass raised, declaring, "We don't fail. We evolve." Now he was the headline failure of the decade. I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I felt a strange heaviness, like I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Because I knew what came next, the calls, the begging, the apologies. I didn't want to be right, but I knew I was. By noon, the phone rang again. This time I answered. "Lila." His voice was hoarse, stripped of its arrogance. "It's your father." "I know," I said, my tone flat. "The systems, they're collapsing. No one knows what's happening." "I think," he hesitated. "I think it's something you wrote," I said. "Please," he continued, his breath heavy. "Help me fix this. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done what I did at the party. I shouldn't have said those things." For a second, I almost softened. He sounded small, human. Not the man who humiliated me under chandeliers. Not the billionaire titan. Just a tired old man watching his empire crumble. But then the memory flashed. The laughter, the cold sting of humiliation, the weight of the wine bottle above my head. The room was full of people pretending it was funny. I heard that laughter again now, echoing in my mind. "You said I was a loser," I whispered. "You said you were kicking me out. You made everyone laugh." I was drunk, angry, stupid. "Please, Lila, I need you. Morgan Access needs you. I'll make it right. I'll sign everything back to you, the patents, the shares, all of it." I looked out the hotel window. The city was a tangle of lights and smoke. "You can't buy me any more, Father," I said softly. "You already sold me once." "Lila," but I ended the call. The silence afterward was so thick it felt alive. I put the phone down and stood still, my reflection staring back at me from the dark window, tired eyes, hollow cheeks, but a kind of calm that felt final. That afternoon, Morgan Access made history for all the wrong reasons. The company's market value dropped by $19 billion before trading halted. The board held an emergency meeting. News drones hovered outside the tower in downtown Chicago, and reporters filled the sidewalks. The word collapse started appearing in headlines by evening. Evan texted me once. "We know you did this, but we also know why." I didn't reply. Around 5, I walked out of the hotel. The air smelled like rain and cold metal. I wandered down to the Chicago River, where the water churned slowly and darkly under the bridges. The sky hung heavy with clouds. My phone kept vibrating in my coat pocket, but I didn't look. I just walked, letting the wind sting my face, feeling it all. The loss, the power, the exhaustion. Near the waterfront cafe, where I'd worked the day before, I stopped. The same violinist was there, playing a mournful tune that carried through the wind. A small crowd had gathered, tossing bills into his open case. I stood back, listening. The melody was fragile, the kind that sounds like it could break at any moment but never does. When the song ended, he looked up at me and said, "Rough day." "You could say that," I answered. He smiled, toothless but kind. "Storms always pass, miss. But the sky never stays the same." I gave him a $10 bill and walked away. By the time I returned to my hotel, the sun was setting behind the skyscrapers, painting the windows in streaks of orange and gold. The news anchors were now calling it the Morgan Meltdown. Commentators debated whether the company could survive. Some predicted bankruptcy within weeks. Others called it the largest digital failure in American corporate history. Then, as if fate wanted to press one final bruise, I got one more call. It was James Thatcher, our lawyer. "Lila," he said carefully, "Victor's looking for you. He's not doing well. I think he's breaking." I didn't respond. "Whatever happened," James continued, "maybe talk to him. This is his whole life falling apart. And whether you meant to or not, you've become part of that story." I almost laughed. His whole life? I thought. What about mine? The one he dismantled piece by piece and called it love? "I'm not part of his story anymore," I said finally. "He's part of mine." I ended the call, closed the curtains, and poured another cup of cold coffee. Outside, the city lights blurred like watercolor. Somewhere out there, my father was watching his empire sink. And for the first time in my life, he couldn't control the outcome. I stood by the window until the last streaks of light faded into the night. The river shimmered faintly under the lamps, carrying reflections of towers that had once meant everything to him. As I turned away, I whispered to no one but myself. "I built the system. He broke the family. Now we're even." And with that, I turned off my phone and let the darkness have the rest of the night. The collapse of Morgan Axis didn't happen in a single explosion. It was a slow drowning. The company sank one headline at a time, one press release, one desperate interview. What had once been a tower of glass and pride in downtown Chicago turned into a ghost building filled with boxes, lawyers, and silence. Each morning brought new reports, investors pulling out, clients switching to competitors, lawsuits piling up. My father's legacy disintegrated, and I watched from afar, untouched, unmoved, or at least I told myself so. The board fired 3 vice presidents in the first week. By the second, Clarissa deleted all her social pages, erasing her public smile and perfect quotes about innovation and family vision. The people who used to praise us now pretended they'd never known our name. James Thatcher, the company lawyer who had once handed me that cruel contract, called twice. I let both calls go unanswered. I knew what he wanted, to talk about rebuilding, about deals and recovery, but I was done with rebuilding illusions. Some ruins are meant to stay that way. When the noise became too much, I left Chicago. I packed everything I owned, 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a worn leather notebook, and drove east until the air turned salty. I stopped in Portland, Maine, a city that smelled of seaweed and rain. There, on a quiet street that sloped gently toward the harbor, I found a white house with a green door and a wide porch. The landlord asked $3,200 a month, more than I should have paid, but the view of the water through the upstairs window made me say yes. It was the kind of house that looked like it forgave people. My life there was small, and I liked it that way. I found work as a systems consultant for a local health clinic. Nothing glamorous, just helping them manage patient databases and digital security. The pay was modest, but the hours were steady, and the work was clean. No billion-dollar contracts, no shareholders breathing down my neck. Just code, coffee, and the quiet hum of machines that helped people heal. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing for power. I was writing for a purpose. I spent my evenings on the porch, wrapped in a gray sweater, watching the ocean fade from blue to silver as the sun went down. Sometimes I'd hear the faint laughter of children playing down the street or the bark of a dog chasing gulls. I had neighbors who smiled when they passed but didn't ask questions. I liked that, being seen without being known. One morning in early spring, I read the news on my tablet. The headline was small, buried near the bottom of the page. Victor Morgan, former CEO of Morgan Axis, dies in boating accident. The article said he had taken a small sailboat out on Lake Michigan. The wind rose suddenly, the boat tipped, and he never made it back. The report was brief. No interviews, no statements, no drama. Just water, silence, and a date. That was all that remained of the man who once ruled the skyline. I sat on the porch for a long time after that. The sea was calm that day, barely moving. A boy coasted by on a bicycle with a loose chain. Somewhere, a dog barked and then stopped. I thought about my father, not the CEO, but the man who once brought me coffee when I stayed up coding all night, who told me stories about building things that last. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what that meant. So had I. I didn't cry, but I did whisper something to the wind. You built your empire, and I built its heart. We both lost it in the end. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel the world settle again. The panic calls stopped. The internet moved on. New companies rose. New faces replaced the old. Morgan Axis became a cautionary tale for business schools and podcasts about corporate ego. I stopped reading about it. The sea outside my window became my only newsfeed, honest, untamed, and always moving. Sometimes, when the wind was right, I walked to the rocky shore at dusk. The water there hissed over the stones, gray and endless. I'd stand there until the tide licked the toes of my boots and whisper to the horizon, as if the world might answer. My name is Lila Morgan, I'd say quietly. I built something once. I broke it. Now I build smaller things that matter. Then I'd walk home, make tea, and sit by the window of my small white house that smelled of lemon soap and salt. I no longer feared the quiet. The quiet was where I belonged, not as the fallen daughter of a billionaire, not as the woman who crashed a company, but as someone who finally understood that redemption doesn't come in applause. It comes in peace, and that, at last, was mine.